Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, dear students. Welcome back to our sessions with the subject Human Resource Management. Today's topic is about ethics and the fair treatment in human resource management. Here we have the following objectives. Explain what is meant by ethical behavior at the work. Discuss important factors that shape ethical behavior at work. Describe ways in which human resource management can influence ethical behavior at work. Employ fair disciplinary practices. And finally, list at least 4 important factors in a way to manage dismissals effectively. In that regard, we have the following contents: ethical behavior at work, human resource management and the ethical behavior at work, fair disciplinary practices, and managing dismissals. As an introduction, we need to understand the meaning in ethics and why is it important in managing staff and human resources as one issue, and also for the good interest of the organization. So here, as for definition, it is the principles of conduct governing the individual or group, or another way, the standards used to decide whether you conduct is right or not. So what is supposed to be conducted and what is supposed not to be. So behavior that depends on a person's frame of reference. Now, as we discuss frame of reference, we have different references everybody has, and regarding these references, we may act upon issues. For example, as you talk about good behavior, so our main references can be values, norms, custom, tradition, religious issues, etc. So based on such kind of references, we may accept something or refuse it. So that's why frame of reference is something important that shapes out the individual's perception on how to consume things. Now, ethical decisions can be either normative judgments or things about morality, as we will discuss inshallah. Now, ethics and the fair treatment at work. We have different issues here. Ethics and the law. Now here, as we talk about ethics, we may have a controversial issue. Sometimes things can be legal, but at the same time not ethical. So as you talk about competition for market, for example, monopolizing the market, so we're talking about free markets, which is something legalized. So it's a legal issue, but as we consider the gap between the rich and the poor people is widening by time, so this might be the unethical part of this kind of system. So a behavior might be legal but unethical. A behavior may be illegal but ethical at the same time because it is concerning something associated with human needs, for example. But at this very specific moment, it can be against the policies set by the company itself. A behavior might be both legal and ethical. And finally, a behavior might be both illegal and unethical, and this should not be conducted at all. Now, ethics, fair treatments, and justice. Here we have components of organizational justice here. So we have the distributive justice, procedural justice, interactional or interpersonal justice. As we talk about these different types referring to justice, we're talking about how benefits are distributed among individuals in a fairly way, either based on merit or based on performance. Procedural justice here, we're talking about the policies that have been set and that everyone is to follow these policies and procedures in disregard to the position of that person or that nominees, for example, or whatsoever. So procedural justice means that things are quite transparent and that everybody should follow the rules. Interactional or interpersonal justice, as for the communication among individuals, that should be just in ways of discussing, for example, benefits, promotions, career, etc., and even putting interest on certain groups over the other. So these issues are about justice regarding the interpersonal issue. Now, what shapes ethical behavior at work? Now here, as we talk about the ethical behavior at work, we have different factors. For example, the individual factors that we talked before, and this is very important. The determinant of individual behavior can be many. For example, we talk about value. Most important things in someone's life can be the financial value, art value, socializing, monetary, etc. And we have also learning, we have also the custom, tradition, the norms. So these things are affiliated with the individual and they may shape out his or her behavior. Then we have the cultural factors. Now, as talking about values, these are the things we take from parents at the very beginning. And then as we grow up, we gain more of these values from the environment where we live. So that's why cultural factors are very important. Organizational factors here. Sometimes companies try to impose or somehow create some kind of culture among its members as to the way people should deal with each other, the way work should be done, benefits, innovation, creativity. So all these are issues affiliating with the organization. The boss's influence. Now this has got something to do with both the individual and the organizational factors. Ethical policies and codes. Now these are examples of codes set by the organizations and that everybody should follow, and the organization culture. Now here we have some questions employees should ask when faced with ethical dilemmas. Now talking about different actions and different decision-making process, we have to consider the following. Is the action legal? Now this is a very comprehensive issue we should answer, based on which we can go downward. Now once it's legal, we have to discuss whether it's ethical or not. Is it right in terms of the benefits to other people around? So that's why we talk about utilitarianism, the utility of every single individual around the decision. Who will be affected as for customers, employees in general, and the environment around, even the subordinates? How will it feel afterwards as it is applied? How will it look in newspaper? Now this is imposing the image of the company. It might also defame the company's reputation, and that is why we have to consider this question. And will it reflect poorly on the company in the long run? Now based on such kind of questions, we notice that we have some issues affiliating with the legal aspects, some ethical aspects, and some others are about the strategic long run aspects. Now, what do we mean by the organizational culture? As we talk about one of the determinants of values, for example. So organizational culture here, the values, traditions, and behaviors a company's employee or company's employees share. Now these are things that can be developed by top management. And we may have also two different cultures. One is actually visible culture, and this is something affiliating with the job itself, the strategy, the way the company would like to be in the short and the long run. We may also have invisible culture affected by the owners. Now how is culture revealed here? Now we have different patterns of behavior, for example, ceremonial events in which we expose these kind of culture values to all employees, or it can be very simply written as rules and spoken commands. Now the physical manifestations here can be written rules, office layout, the organizational structure, and the ethics codes. Now complying by all these factors by the employees will create what we mean by the organization culture. It becomes now known to all individuals within the boundary of the business. Now the manager's role in creating culture. Now talking about culture, it isn't something that is embedded in the contract of the employees. So that is why it's a continuous process. So here the manager should first clarify the expectations as for example, innovation. He or she may use signs and symbols. Okay, can also address examples, for example, of previous managers, previous individuals who set good exemplary in the company, provide physical support, and use stories that can tell, of course, positive consequences of adopting such kind of culture, either among individuals inside or in other similar organizations adopting similar culture. And finally, organize rites and ceremonies. Now these are things that can somehow enhance these concepts among the employees. Now the human resource management rule in promoting ethics and fair treatment can be in different ways. For example, It starts from the very beginning as we select employees. Then we have special kind of training or sessions in which employees are exposed to different ethical issues. So these can be designed by the human resource management as ethic training. Rewards and disciplinary system adopted by the human resource management that enhance the ethical background of the employees and support, of course, the conduct of such kind of fair treatment. Workplace aggression and violence, this is another issue. Now, regarding the policies set by the human resource management and the top management, now these things should be also considered as for rules and policies. And finally, performance appraisal. One of the factors that individuals should be appraised by is actually the ethical issues and the fair treatment, either in or outside the company itself, as he or she may deal with customers. Now, as we talk about these activities, the first one is selection. So fostering the perception of fairness in the process of recruitment and hiring of people. In other words, we have to set standards as how to choose the individuals for the positions. So one of the standards we have to use as for selection is about ethics and the ethical background of the candidates. Besides training, how to recognize ethical dilemmas. Now this is one of the issues that can be designed in programs and will be offered to employees. Maybe different cases will be offered. Different cases can also be discussed so that to spot out these kind of dilemmas and the solutions. How to use ethical frameworks to resolve problems. Because we said before, you may be assigned to make a decision, but the point here is not actually the outcome of the decision, which can be of benefit to the company. The point here, whether your decision is actually ethical. So here we have to consider all the stakeholders involved in this decision making. So we may talk about the employees themselves, the company, the decision maker, and the environment. How to use human resource functions in ethical ways, this is another aspect that can be part of the training program. Besides here, we have the performance appraisal, measuring and rewarding employees who follow ethical standards. So ethics and the fair treatment will be one of the standards by which employees will be treated, appraised, and accordingly can be also promoted and rewarded. Now we have reward and disciplinary system. Now, if the human resource management adopts systems that can somehow help the organization swiftly and harshly punishes unethical conduct, employees will later learn that such kind of behaviors are not actually welcome and accordingly will let go. So that is why reward and disciplinary system can be one of the parts that human resource manager use to enhance the good ethics and fair treatment. Now, workplace aggression and violence. Now, taking care that human resource actions do not foster perceptions of inequities. Now, inequities, especially being perceived by individual, will usually result in violence, dissatisfaction, stereotyping, or sometimes leaving the job. Now, building two-way communications, as we talk about the interpersonal communication, which is very important as we talk about fairness. So here, perceptions of fair treatment depend on engagement, explanation, and expectation clarity. So engagement of employees within either decision-making process, so that commitment will be there. Explaining rules, policies. Sometimes you might even need to explain why the decision is being made this way. Expectations from employees and also expectations by employees from companies, clarifying these issues so that transparency is standards by which employees can also somehow measure the fair treatment from top downward to employees. Now, employee discipline and privacy. This is another issue as we talk about fairness. Now, fair and just discipline process. We need first to clarify the rules and regulations. This is very important so that as decision being taken, employees will be clear. A system of progressive and penalties should also be developed and also be clarified. An appeal process. Now, it is part of the rights that the employee has to appeal for such kind of grievances, problems that may happen, especially if there's a conduct or misconduct by top management toward subordinates. Now, fair discipline. Now, there are some issues here we have to talk about as we talk about disciplinary. Does evidence support the charge of employee wrongdoing in terms of either doing, for example, performance, other peers witnessing? Was the employee warned of disciplinary consequences? And this is very important. Now, the human resource management, as we talk about rules, should clarify these issues from the very beginning. And this can also be clarified in the orientation. Was the rule violated? And was it reasonably related to the efficient and safe operation of the work environment? And so that the decision according to such kind of problem is done fairly? Was the matter fairly and adequately investigated before administering discipline? Now, in terms of either conducting this investigation by the direct supervisor, a committee, or through the policies adopted by the company itself. Now, did the investigation produce substantial evidence of misconduct? And if so, would the employee have the chance to appeal? We should also have rules, orders, or penalty being applied even handedly. Was the penalty reasonably related to the misconduct in terms of the size of such kind of misconduct, and also the gravity of the penalty itself, and to the employee's past work history, because sometimes mistakes happen. Did anger, heresy, or personal impression affect the decision? So these are all issues we have to take into consideration as we consider the disciplinary outcome. Now here we also have issues about discipline without punishment. For example, issue an oral reminder. This is of course something that we can consider according to the gravity of the mistake or the gravity of the misconduct. Should another incident arise within 6 weeks, issue a formal written reminder, a copy of which, for example, is placed in the employee's personal file, and he or she should be informed of that. Now, this can be like a long run kind of filing for the employees, and once he or she is informed, they will consider the future happenings, occurrences. Give a day's paid decision-making leave, which can help sometimes. If no further incidents occur in the next year, then purge the 1-day paid suspension from the person's file and let that person knows about this issue. If the behavior is repeated, the next step could be dismissal. Now, these are issues we can take instead of directly using the disciplinary decision. Now, we talk about the employee privacy, which is an important issue here. Employee privacy violations include background checks. Now, this is among the requirements of hiring an employee. And it is very important in different countries. For example, in the United States, background checks is one of the most important issues as we talk about requirements. So in other countries, for example, like the Middle East countries, maybe the background checks are not so far conducted seriously by companies, and that varies from one place to another. It also varies according to the position of the work. So should the position be very important and may include huge responsibilities, then background checks will be of paramount importance. Monitoring off-duty conduct and lifestyle, workplace searches, and monitoring of workplace activities. Now, these are examples of violation of the employee's privacy. Now, we need to discuss things about dismissals. As talking about fairness and conducting the ethical concepts or adopting the ethical concepts in companies, we have to talk about dismissals. A dismissal, which is one of the things that human resource may have to deal with, is the involuntary termination of the employee's employment with the firm. Now, in disregards of the reason why, this is something that the company should take decisions in certain situations. Now, the wrongful discharge here is another issue as we talk about dismissal. It refers to the dismissal that violates the law or fails to comply with the contractual arrangement stated or implied by the employer. This mistake is made by the company itself or the director or the superdirector for so many reasons. In this regards to the reason why wrongful discharge happens, this may have dramatic consequences on the company itself, some of which can be also legal. So here, basis for dismissal to avoid such kind of problems. Unsatisfactory performance of the employee can be the result why people are dismissed from companies. So either in terms of the skills needed, competencies, the way things are done are not professional, or they do not meet with the standards set by the companies, and this can be a reason why dismissal is necessary. Misconduct is another reason of dismissals, and we talked before, we said that the gravity and severity of the misconduct should also be discussed. The lack of qualifications in some part of the company's positions. Here, this is another issue. People can be also dismissed for. Changed requirements of the job, the elimination of the job itself. Sometimes the company itself may have to delayer some of its parts because of a financial crisis, for example. So because of this, the company will be in no longer need for such employees. So they may also be dismissed, of course, after settling their own positions in terms of the financial merits, the financial requirements of dismissal here in this case. Now, insubordination here, repeated direct disregarded of the boss's authority can also be one of the issue. Repeated direct disobediences of or refusal to obey the boss's order, particularly in front of the others. So this is one of the issues we consider as a serious misconduct. Should it happen, then dismissal can also be justified. Repeated deliberate disobedience of clearly stated company policies, rules, or regulations and procedures. And then by time, this employee who disobeys such kind of policies or rules, especially these kind of policies that may affect the work of the business or somehow defame the business itself, can be one of the reasons why employees are dismissed. Repeated contemptuous display of disrespect. So here, such as making insolent or rude comments, especially in front of the others, or deliberately somehow insulting the others. It can be either among peers or from the employee to the top management, to the direct supervisor, or sometimes even to customers. Now, how do we manage dismissals? First of all, we need to foresee perceptions of fairness in dismissals among managers, of course. So here, we must have a supervising manager that give full explanations of why and how termination decisions were made. Institute a formal multi-step procedure, including warning, through steps, of course, establishing a neutral appeal process. This must be adopted by human resource manager to provide the employees the right to appeal once problems affiliating with dismissal happens. Security measures. Now, should the dismissal happen, some other considerations should also be taken. For example, collect all company property and keys. Accompany the employee out of their offices and building, and disable internet-related passwords and accounts. So these are issues that should be taken for security issues. Sometimes employees or poor performers may like to pay back, for example, or revenge for being dismissed by the company by meaning, for example, to harm the company itself or defame the business name. So that is why these things should also be taken into consideration once dismissal happens. Now here, avoiding wrongful discharge suits here. We talk about suits, we talk about legal issues To reduce exposure to wrongful discharge suits, we need to ask the following. So first of all, is the employee's employment covered by any type of written agreement, including a collective bargaining agreement with the syndicates of the company or that works with the company itself, the union? Is there any workers' compensation involvement as for dismissals? And if so, it should be offered to the employee who had been or who was dismissed. Have reasonable rules and regulations being communicated and enforced? Now this can also be one of the things that may bring the case to the court. So that is why we have to address this issue first. Has the employee been given an opportunity to explain any rule violations or to correct poor performance, without which the employee may have a chance to sue the company itself and raise this issue up to the court? So that is why in the system of the human resource management, they must adopt a system in which, or the system itself is actually based on systematic procedure, okay, including all these points. Now the termination interview, which is the last issue here. Now the guidelines for the termination interview, which is very important. Plan the interview carefully because this is not going to be an easy interview. You're talking about exiling somebody out of the company itself. Get to the point, talk about tasks, do not get things personal. Describe the situation, why the decision based on dismissal actually was made. And listen to employee who may have to justify the action and the performance. Review all the elements of the severance package and identify the next step. Now the exact interview, which will be the result of the interview here. Now its main aim is, of course, is to elicit information about the job or related matters that might give the employer a better insight into what is right or wrong about the company itself. So here the assumption is that because employee is leaving, he or she will be frank and straightforward. And because of this, information that can be gathered from this person can be of great value to the company. The knowledge can also be used to improve the conditions that may be leading to other employees leaving the company. So honesty of employees leaving the job can be way better than those who are still in because of the lack of fear of any consequences of such kind of honesty. And that is why a lot of companies consider such kind of information as whenever they have exec interview so as to develop future working conditions to avoid these problems. Now, adjusting to downsizing and mergers, which is another way we have to discuss as we talk about ethics. Identifying objectives and constraints. Form a downsizing team, which is a committee that studies all the consequences, benefits, conditions, etc. Address legal issues as to employees' rights. Plan post-implementation actions. And finally, address security concerns. If you happen to, for example, eliminate some kind of the jobs position, delay parts of the company's hierarchy. Now here are guidelines for treatment of departing employees during merger. Avoid the appearance of power and domination and talk about the interest of the business itself. Avoid win-lose behavior. As for the situation considered here, of course it is a win-lose situation, but as for the behavior being presented by the manager, this should be somehow managed not to be clear in the sight of the employee. Remain business-like and professional in all dealings. And remember, these can be future decisions, for example, in hiring. Maintain a positive feeling about the acquired company. Now by this, dear students, we come to the end of our session in which we discuss here different issues about ethics and behavior at work. Discussed the important factors as to ethical behaviors in general. We described ways in which human resource management can influence ethical behavior at work regarding the functions. We discussed the fair disciplinary practices and we listed important factors in managing dismissals effectively. Now, As usual, we have an attachment here that is your assignment for this session. Students are supposed to answer the questions in the assignment according to the time, duration, and the deadline set, of course. Thank you very much for listening. Wish you all the best in the course of your life and your study, and see you inshallah next time. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.